All right, so this time we are having the success story interview for with Collin Snade. So Collin, I would like you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you.
Hey everyone, so my name's Collin Schneidy. I graduated from Sabio in cohort 118. I have been a mobile developer primarily focused on the same stack that you learn in Sabio for SQL type databases, C#.NET services in our servers, and working with a mixture of React and React Native on various projects on the front end. I work for a boutique software company in the central United States. So I am a consultant for many different projects, and I'm also a contractor on the side for additional projects in the mobile world. I've been involved in software to some degree for the last 7 years. However, I learned how to program at Sabio and understood what it meant to put hands to keys after going through the boot camp. I am 31 years old and I didn't touch a lick of programming until I was 30, 29, somewhere around that time period.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction. So tell us about yourself and before you started with Sabio. What did you do? What you used to do? What you used to do? And then tell us where you are right now after Sabio.
Sure. So before I went to Sabio, Um, I was a biomedical technician for hospital equipment in Arizona. And before that, I was spent a brief stint as a CDL truck driver and a bunch of time in the Marine Corps as a sergeant. Hoorah. Um, my background was pretty diverse. I kind of adapted to the things that I needed based on where I lived and what kind of career I had. But ultimately, I moved to the Philippines in 2021, and I decided I was just going to live there for a while. And I realized that the only kind of job that you're going to get in the Philippines that makes any kind of good American money is programming. And that's ultimately what funneled me into Sabio's boot camp and got me started on this path. So after going to Sabio, I picked up a job a few weeks out of boot camp, the same job that I still have now. And I started working from the Philippines. So I worked overnight 12, not nearly as bad as boot camp, man. In boot camp, I worked midnight to noon every day. I mean, you're talking about challenge. That was a challenge. And then think about all the interviews you got to do for American companies. You're getting up at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning to run interviews with people. But I spent around half of my career with the current company that I'm with, working from the Philippines, and then I migrated with my family back to America um, mid last year and started working on Central Standard Hours.
I mean, that sounds amazing. So it was such a neat, like, a challenge, as you said, all of these things with the time zone, with the hours scheduled. And as you said, having interviews at this, extra hours, let's say. Impressive, impressive. So
Yeah.
at the beginning, when you were working as, in this other field, how did you hear about Sabio specifically?
So being a Marine, having gone through the GI Bill courses for school, I had made good use of my school GI Bill just to, if nothing else, to earn a bit of extra cash and did some degrees, but I had used up literally everything except a week of my GI Bill. Um, so when I heard about the vet tech program, I took quite a long time to research it and figure out what would be best for me. I took the time and researched what languages were best suited. I had counsel from a very experienced developer, my dad. He's been in C# 20 years. And there was a heavy push that the most used languages in the world lined up with the stack that Sabio's teaching, along with them being a preferred provider on the government's website for bootcamp providers. And then the thing that really set me over the edge was Sabio had a very unique scholarship running at the same time. And it was just a deal I couldn't resist. And I was like, you know what? If Sabio is going to take care of me so well to help me to go to school and learn how to program, I'm just gonna take him up on it. It was an answer to prayer.
Hmm. Awesome. That so in cohort, you said 112, right? 102 was your cohort.
118.
Oh, okay, so 118. Did you do the 13 weeks program or the 17 weeks program?
So I did the 17 weeks program. I did
Mhm.
the month of pre-work. Pat took the assessment. I knew nothing about programming. There was no way that I was going to take 13 weeks and just jump right into it. And it was a challenge every day. It was a challenge learning new concepts, constantly learning. My dad told me getting into the field, he said, this is a field of constant learning. You will never stop learning, and Sabio set the bar high for that right away. I managed to pass, I think, maybe a week early to get started early on the React materials. But it never let up. The hill just got a little bit steeper as you went.
Mhm, I understand. Let me ask you something. So tell us about, you know, about your experience during the program. I know that you just mentioned that you were, in the Philippines. Um, so I would love to hear how was that remote experience of, constantly learning, as you said, and, receiving such as much information. How did that go?
So I remember at first I thought, well, maybe I could, work a little bit async, like work on some of my hours and do the rest like on a somewhat covered shift with my peers. And I even at one point in time approached Gregorio and I was like, "Hey, boss, I'm in the Philippines. Can I work like a partial shift and then the rest on my own hours?" And you can just imagine how that went over. And he's like, "No." And that's fair. The things that I really appreciate Gregorio, I have to say that, there's mixed reviews and critiques from people online sometimes about Sabio, but the people that are haters not because this is a bad boot camp. They're not haters because the people are mean, but because you're either going to get with the program and learn what it means to succeed, or you're not cut out for this program because being a programmer in the real world, I use a lot of the mental and scheduling concepts that Gregorio and the staff instilled. Those are necessary. Being able to work on a client's hours and fit yourself, mold yourself to their needs, that's part of being a programmer and working remotely. Like you have to be available for people if you're going to work remotely. I carry a phone with me like all the time. And you know what? My clients can ping me and I'm available pretty much anytime. And that's how I keep my clients happy and I'm able to take on extra work and make a lot of money. But I'm totally rabbit trailing at this point. Um, Working from the Philippines was again, it was midnight to noon every day. I got up at around 11 o'clock at night. I started my day at midnight with, our daily meetings, what are we gonna accomplish for the day? What are our blockers? And we do that in the real world too, uh, some clients. I digress. And I would constantly be pinging the instructors for questions. I mean, I remember that if I was not on that list at any period in point in time, I was getting ready to get on the list again. And it's because also, you want to make sure that not only are you meeting the requirements. I was a vet tech student, and those requirements are very, very stringent. You need to make all of those requirements and do everything you can to make those requirements. But also because there's legitimately a lot of things that I needed to learn and to resolve with instructors. and even now I find myself still going to resources on a constant, every day I'm going to resources. Hi, ChatGPT. And I am bugging and I'm asking questions about design concepts, about how certain properties or methods might work, getting ideas for how I might refactor a component for an issue that I'm facing. You'd be amazed at what ChatGPT can do. I digress. But having a support structure there and learning to communicate and to tell them like, hey, this is what I'm working with, this is what I need to have assistance with is vital to the job. Because when I started my career in the company that I'm in now, they realized quickly that, hey, this is kind of a junior developer. 4 months of experience and even at 12 hours a day does not make you a senior developer. It makes you a junior to mid if you work really hard. So being able to ping them constantly and get follow-ups, I had meetings that I would meet with the staff at my on my team and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. Can you help me to work through this issue over here? Eventually that went away and that became unnecessary. But in the very beginning, getting used to certain concepts about how the code base worked, getting the projects started up, making sure that I was comfortable making changes in the IDEs, those were all essential. So asking those questions was a regular part of my routine, and I did not miss one question, at least for the requirements. I tried to always get ahead of the schedule in Sabio. I remember, back in the beginning, it seems so silly now, but when I was in React, I was just gunning for C sharp. I was like, come on, boss, put me on C sharp. I'm ready for C sharp. And they're like, nope, here's another task in React. Nope, here's another task in React. I was like, come on, boss, I got this. Give me C sharp. He said, nope, here's another task in React. And then finally, maybe like a day early, if you're lucky, you can get ahead into the next set of curricula if they've got nothing left for you to do. And you're like, yes, I made it. And looking back on that, I realized that you really just need to spend as much time as you can in every language, because these are full languages. Mastery of these languages takes a lot longer than the boot camp. I mean, just to hone the basics and have a foundation that you can stand on that doesn't erode away right after boot camp. Even getting that far requires a lot of effort and time in the boot camp in each language, and even afterwards to revisit and to keep working on it. So I worked in each of those languages, but you don't need to get ahead of yourself. The lesson there is enjoy the time that you get to spend in each section, because chances are you'll be spending a lot of time in all of those sections if you get a job with all three of that. If you get a full stack development job in C sharp and SQL type databases with React. And after moving through each of the language phases, moving into the project, it again blew my mind how different the concepts were and the things that you had to learn, being introduced to things like lazy loading in React and flattening of stacks. And I mean, these are things that went right over my head trying to understand just how to fix my component and make my component do something really cool. And I began to learn how to work with libraries. Like the project that we had, I went onto npm and I found a QR scanner library, and I learned how to take that library and implement it into my code so that I could scan a cool QR and it would do some cool thing in my app. It's been a while, man. It was supposed to scan a QR and then I guess like maybe add a worker to my list. I digress, like admin to user stuff. But I got it working, and it was a really fun part of our project demo, because you had to like take a somebody had to take a QR scanner and like in the demo, like, face it up to the screen and like scan a QR and then show how that action changed things on the screen and what happened. So a lot of fun putting the demo together. And um after our team at that point in time was maybe about 25 people. We had 25 people that made it into the project and were working efficiently on the project. Some people got cool tasks like working in authentication, and I remember talking to my peers at the time like, oh, it's so difficult working in authentication. And now I look back on it and I think, man, I wish I had authentication, because concepts, taking on those difficult concepts now really sets you up for success later. It took me a lot longer to figure out how authentication processes work and how to integrate with authentication, because I didn't take on those heavier tasks in boot camp. Not like I didn't have a choice, they assigned you to wherever they were going to put you. But if you get those opportunities, it means you have a great chance to learn some of the deeper concepts that are very valuable in the real world quickly. And then ultimately, I graduated with my cohort in September of 2022. And by that time, I was already putting out 50 resumes every day, minimum 50 resumes. I had got myself a system. I was easy apply, about 1 week out, LinkedIn, Indeed, any developer in my stack, SQL, React, C Sharp, anything. And I just easy applied to everything. I didn't even bother with the fill out the applications. I was going to make my time as efficient as possible. And I applied to at least 50 applications every single day for weeks. And I would get maybe 4 or 5 interviews a week if I was lucky. And I had 2 of those go to final stages. The first one was this ice cream place in California. It was called Somi Somi Ice Cream. And I really sold myself short on the first interview. I showed up to this interview and I was like, man, I just need any job. I was thinking, I don't know what my skills are worth yet, and I just need something to start. And they were like, "Oh, so what's your rate?" And I thought, okay, I'll because I'm in the Philippines, I'll put 100,000 peso, which is actually really low. That's like $1,800 a month. That's below minimum wage. In the Philippines, that's a lot of money. But in America, that's not. And when they jumped on it, and I just felt so foolish and realized like I sold myself way short for what they're looking, even for what they're looking for, that I could have done so much better. And I immediately just kept going and applying for more interviews, even though they gave me the job. And by the time that I had worked 1 day at that job, I already had interviews and follow up from other companies that were interested, like the one I have now. And I used the first job as leverage. And I just said, I didn't tell them what I made. I just said, if you can offer me more than 80,000 a year, I'll be interested. I just threw it out there. And then the boss was like, done. And he offers me 85. And I was like, I mean, you think about the jump right there. That is going from 30,000 a year to 85,000 a year. And that's when you realize like my skills are valuable. Like what you have as skills, they can become worth a lot of money. Like I'll give you an example. When I got into my company, they realized very quickly that I was junior. Okay, let's put that out there. Let's be honest here. Most people are going to come out of boot camp. They're going to be kind of junior, because, and it's not your fault, because what you've learned, you only spent 4 months in it. These programming languages are deep. There is a lot to them. Getting familiar with a lot of different concepts. You're doing three languages. So, don't sell yourself short, but just realize that you have a lot to learn. And when I showed up to the job, he puts me with this like super senior dev, and the super senior dev is like, do this really complicated thing. And I'm like, and I like reached back out to the dev. I was like, can you like walk me through doing this? And then it only took 1 or 2 times for the senior dev to be like, hey, this guy is, kind of like, mid to junior here. And the boss took me and he's like, hey, I realize you're a little bit more junior than we thought you were. And here's let's retrospect on this for a second. Why does he not realize at first that I might be a little, mid to junior? It's because of the interview and how things went in the interview. You can really set yourself up for success depending on how you portray yourself and how you explain your code. I had done the interview really well. I had taken my code base from Sabio. I had walked them through my component. I had explained how I integrated the library, how I managed state, how my use effects ran, and what the purpose of all these functions was. I demonstrated that functionality to them and showed them that I understand working between multiple pages in a website. I understand these concepts. And they gave me that credit, and they said, hey, look, if this guy is able to understand the complexity of Sabio's environment and work inside of it, then he can work inside the complexity of our environment. And the thing that really benefited me was Sabio's architecture, because my code might be a little bit simpler inside of it, but knowing how to work inside of their complex architecture is what gave me the green light to learn how to work inside of other complex architecture. So he takes me aside and he's like, you're a little bit more junior, but he liked me. And I'm going to tell you right now, if they like you, they'll keep you. So he liked me and he said, what can we put you on? And I said, boss, put me on mobile. I love mobile. I had a history of working with some developers to have them build a mobile app for me. I actually paid some guy in India like $6,000 to make me a mobile app. And I would QA it every day. And I would oh, I pressed this button. It doesn't do what I want it to do. I knew nothing about programming, but I had an interest in mobile. So he puts me on React Native, which is it's like a superset of React. All the functionality is the same concept, but the returns are different. You don't use HTML. You use a specific React language for mobile devices. I digress. The concepts were similar enough that I could move into that language with a C# database, or excuse me, with C# server and a SQL type database. And that's where I've been ever since. And I've just added more and more projects. I started with one, and then I got two, and then three, and then I added 2 web apps, and then I started doing some contracting, and I have some other work that I've helped in the past for other mobile apps. And I'm going to tell you that that skill now is worth $75 an hour personally. My boss, when he lends me out, because I'm a consultant, so I have a personal pay and then I have a rate that my customers are charged. I get paid 45-ish an hour, which is, $95,000. But my rate for my customers, they get charged $180 per hour for my time. That's the value of these skills that you're developing. That, imagine if I was my boss, I could, put myself out there for 108, but that's why he's the boss. But still, my skills are valuable enough that people are willing to work with me at $75 an hour because that skill set is valuable out there in the world. React, React Native, C#, these are large languages. There's a lot of need for them in jobs, SQL type databases. You're in the right stack, folks. So to conclude on my long rabbit trail here, uh, you're in a great boot camp, and you have to stick with it after you get out of your school, because if you don't, if these skills slide and you lose foundation, you just lost all the work you put into this boot camp.
I mean, I really loved all that long answer and story. Um, and I just have one question regarding everything you said, and this is more related to, the job searching. So you mentioned that this ice cream company offered you the job, and then you also mentioned that you had two offers, and that was the one, like the company where you're at right now. So I would love to hear, how is it doing with this company, which is the company that you actually chose at that time? And because I heard that you became senior developer right now. So I would love to hear about that part.
So the current company that I'm at right now is, I started off at $85,000 a year. After I took the first project on, the first week was really rough, man. I felt it. It was working in web React at that seniors level. I mean, that guy still runs circles around me. He's like a partner in a company. He's awesome. I love him. I take him for inspiration for what I do still. Um, and side note, it's great to find a mentor. You need a mentor when you go into your new job. You need somebody to look up to, somebody to pattern yourself after that is succeeding. You need that. I digress though on that. So I started after that first week of really rough development on web. When I moved into mobile, there just was a vacuum. There's a vacuum that needed to be filled. And another great lesson here is find a place that nobody else is doing anything and fill it. There was a developer who had done some work in mobile, but that really wasn't his thing. He did it as sort of like I guess the best way to describe is an MVP. It was a type of MVP just to show the client what we could do for them, but at the time there wasn't really any serious push for this project. So I brought this energy to the project and I brought this desire to see mobile expand. And then the opportunities came where they said, hey, we like that this guy is fixing bugs on here, that he's improving it. Let's, start doing some projects with it. Let's make it something real. Let's make it an app that we're actually using and involving in our business. And so we put out several releases of that. And then they said, hey, he did really good on this app. So we have this app over here that's also struggling really badly from this overseas team. Can you take it? Can you, fix it? And so I took that app over, and it was this team from India, and they were really struggling. They knew the framework really well, but they just didn't understand logic. And after a few months, they just said, you know what, here's the project, fix it. And I worked some long hours to get that project from a really bad position to a ready to release in a really short period of time. And we released on release day, which was a huge bonus for my company and for the client. So I came back to my boss. I was like, hey, boss, I just, got your client his release on time and I worked all these extra hours to help you to get this out the door. So how about a raise? And he's like, okay, what do you want? I was like, and again, I tend to sell myself short. I was like, how about like, $2,000, $3,000? And he laughed at me. He's like, you only want a raise of like $2,000 to $3,000? And this is my boss, he makes a lot of money, so he understands the value of what I do. And he was like, I said, okay. He said, give me your pie in the sky. I made 85,000 at the time. And I said, well, I want 100. I want 100,000. And that's a 15,000 increase. And he was like, okay, how about I meet you at 95? And I said, deal. So raise got 95,000. I continued working on that project. We made some other really great milestones. I got him to agree to give me my laptop. The company had bought me a MacBook Pro, and this is not just because they wanted me to work on some fancy laptop, but if you're working on mobile, you must have a Mac. This was kind of just a requirement for my job. You cannot develop React Native for both systems without working on a Mac system. But I still work in all the same languages, right? I mean, these are Microsoft-based languages, SQL, C Sharp. So you learn a few different tooling after a while. I transitioned from Visual Studio to Rider. I still use Visual Studio Code. I love Visual Studio Code. You can't use SQL Server Management Studio on a Mac. So Rider actually allows you to access databases inside of it. So I use Rider for both C# and SQL type databases. So those two are my main IDEs. I add on like Xcode for iOS and Android Studio for Android. I digress. So then after they gave me the second app and things went well, they said, oh, we're gonna, that super senior developer's retiring. We're gonna give you his web projects. So now I'm also doing web React. And this introduces things like Node. So previously I'm working in React Native, C#, SQL. And because I did well in that stack, they said, hey, we're going to transition you into another vacuum. Remember, you're always going to do well in the vacuum because they don't have anybody else to do the work. You're going to be able to start from a lower standard bar and work your way up, get used to the project, become the expert yourself. So I started working on a web project, and I'm going to tell you that his architecture was complex. It was again a struggle. It was a learning challenge. It was a lot of hours spent just understanding how he worked. I mean, good night. He had lots of components within components within components, and then he had hooks, custom hooks, which went into custom services which called a serverless file because Node allows you to run your own server in JavaScript. So you run your backend on JavaScript, you run your front end on JavaScript, TypeScript. I digress. Um, but that set me a precedent. I can write my own custom hooks now, and I do. I write my own custom hooks in React for various features that I want to implement. I create providers and contexts. Hi, ChatGPT. Again, chat is great for putting some of this stuff together. Because, what if I have like this modal that I want to pop up? I shouldn't, just create one modal and then put it in every component. Maybe I can have it in one place that I have just a function that calls it from any place in the app. And that's the gist of the custom things I create. I digress. I'm going off on another rabbit trail. So we did some work on that web-based software. Again, a struggle because you're learning something new. And we struggled through it. And there was a contractor, he wasn't really doing his job. And so I took it over from him and he got the boot, and just like the former overseas developer. And here I am now, I'm taking on the web. And at this point in time, in the Philippines, my boss really likes this idea of working with the Philippines. So now to replace me on the previous projects, he's got Filipino developers working on them. So I am managing those developers as they take care of the mobile apps, and I'm moving now into web while managing their work. And that's kind of the same place that I'm still in today. I've taken on 2 web projects with my company. The Filipino developers pretty much run all the development for one of the current mobile apps that we're about to send out another release. And I'm working on new projects as they need be for whatever releases that we have come out.
Hmm. Okay, perfect. Let me ask you something. So how long did it take, like since you graduated from the program until you actually got this job?
So I graduated September 9th. Um, I I made sure to explain to my employer at the time that I had finished contracting work, because essentially what you're doing is Sabio has a contract with the customer that they are providing for. You worked for them through the duration of boot camp and you completed your contract when you finished boot camp because you provided a product to the customer. Now that's not always the case. In some boot camps, you pass the project on to the next cohort. My cohort happened to be the one that passed on the project. So we were MVP complete and we were done with the client. Um, and so my boss asked me, as every boss does, so why'd you leave your last company? And I was like, well, we did the job. That's it. There, it was a contract. We made an MVP and we released it, and they don't want any more work from us. So it's like, they're looking for a reason of like, why aren't you still with your previous employer? And that satisfied my boss. My boss was satisfied with that answer. And I got hired. The ice cream place took me on like third week of September, and I got hired the third middle of the third week of September for the company I'm currently with, and then I started right at the beginning of October. So from graduation to starting my new job was September 9th to October 3rd.
I mean, that was very short.
Yeah.
Extremely short. Like actually you got the role very, very fast. Um,
Yeah.
so now that you go and touch that point of interviews, so you earlier mentioned that you were having around 4 to 5 interviews a week if you were lucky. And then I would like to ask you, how did those interviews go? Because you already mentioned one that maybe you sold yourself a little bit short, but then so how did all the rest of the interviews go?
So I tried a whole lot of various techniques with different employers. It wasn't a cookie cutter solution for me of how I was going to apply. I threw a bunch of seeds out. And there's this really great concept, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. And the concept of you don't reap what you don't sow. So I tried a whole bunch of different methods. I wasn't sure what was going to work. In some cases, I wanted my experience on applications to be like, hey, the value of my experience is 5 years, for instance. And in some places, it's like, yeah, I only actually have like, a little bit of time-based experience. I couldn't tell you which employer got which application because I tried a whole bunch of them. I had maybe 3 or 4 different ways that I would try different employers and interviews. But there was one pretty clear-cut answer among most of the employers, and it was I had to learn to come to them right off the bat and say, "Hi, I'm in the Philippines. Is that going to be a problem?" Because several employers would start the interview process with me, and then I'd be like, "Oh, by the way, I have residence in America, but I'm in the Philippines." And they're like, "Oh yeah, we can't do that. We can't work with somebody from the Philippines." And so that was a major limitation. But it also funneled me into requiring to work from remote because I'm just not picking up and moving to Ohio. I'm not picking up and moving to Florida. I'm in the Philippines. I'm right where I'm gonna stay. So I started to tell people that right off the bat when I would get into interviews. I'd say, "Hi, my name's Collin. These are the skills that I know. I'm in the Philippines. Is that going to be a problem?" And with my current employer, they were like, "No, no, that's not going to be a problem." And with the ice cream place, they were specifically looking for people from the Philippines, and that's why I sold myself short because I thought, oh well, they're probably trying to pay them according to what people make in the Philippines. So, and even on my resumes, remember the guy that I hired from India to make me a mobile app? Well, I count that as experience, right? Because I did QA with him, and I pressed the buttons. And I told him, "Hey, that doesn't work right." Because in reality, that happens every day in my job. I have a QA tester and they don't know anything about mobile. They don't know how to program in React Native. Now she does know some React. So, but she just, she presses the button, she tells me if it works or not. And that is very legitimate experience because I'm going to tell you that user testing and getting feedback and going through and making sure that you are validating the functionality that you create is very important. So I counted 5 years of personal project experience and even being able to show what the developer had created and understanding just a little bit of what he did and how to talk about, maybe just some of the high level services he used, that counted towards my credit. So ultimately that's the resume I walked into my current company with. I walked into them with the resume of, "Hey, I have this 5 years of experience. Here is, the contract work that I did for the Sabio employer, except it's, just the employer, not Sabio. Nothing about Sabio. And here is, my work. Look at how my work looks. Let's focus on this. Let me show you how it works. Let me show you how I know how it functions." And then they can ask questions and they can gauge the depth of my knowledge. If you can answer questions and win their confidence and show them the ability to work in complex environments or even acknowledge complex environments, you're telling them, "Hey, I may not even know how to do those complex things yet, but I can learn to do it." And that's really what matters more than anything else in the software environment is not it's demonstrating a little bit to show that you can do a lot. Because more than often, you're not going to be a perfect fit for what they're looking for, but they need to know that you can do it.
Definitely. Like showing willingness to learn or the potential that you have as a developer is definitely important. But then, so I understand that, of course, the location was a very huge blocker, let's say, for you as far as, getting all these offers ongoing. But how did you overcome when they asked you questions about, technical skills or years of experience that you just didn't have at that time? More than just saying like, I'm based in the Philippines and also I have the willingness to learn and the potential to do this.
So how did I get over the big questions of how many years of experience do you have? That's the question, right?
Yes.
So I let the employer ultimately determine the answer to that question for themselves. So I answered them with the answer of, "Hey, I have, let's say 6 years in the field, 5 years, because at that time it was 5 years in the general software environment world." And the way that I probably phrased it was something to the effect of, "I have 5 years of software development experience." Now, I was not the programmer. I did not program 4 or 5 years, but I had enough that I could lean on, that I could, if you asked me, I could give you some high level questions like, oh yeah, I've worked with AWS before. Oh yeah, we use an EC2 environment. Now I know those things not because I set them up, not because I created them, but because the developer did and he told me about them. And I have just enough knowledge to walk into that portal and look at it and say, yeah, it's there, it works. Or hey, I've worked with CloudFront before, another AWS feature where I watch the HTTP requests go up and down, and I learn about HTTP requests and how many of them there can be. There can be a lot of HTTP requests. And a few other basic things like this. Having a developer account. I had a developer account, and you should have a developer account. I had a GitHub that was standing with the, the repo that I had previously used from that developer. I had store accounts. You could look, you can see my work on the Apple and the Google Play stores with my name on it. So I leveraged as much of whatever I had in the software world previously to get as much credit as I could for the technical experience that I have today. And as much as you can ratchet that lever up, and a lot of previous maybe little bits of experience here and there can lift up just a little bit of experience to get you where you need to go and get started. But it really helps to be able to reference anything, something in your background that you can speak intelligently about software development. Because unfortunately, the stigma is very true that if you walk into that interview and you've got nothing in the past to show them, you are at a disadvantage. You have to try to focus the conversation away from your past experience and just how good you are at programming today. You really have to frame that reference there, because ultimately that's what makes you as a programmer. It's where you are today. And, there's a lot of talk in LinkedIn circles about how valuable you are as a programmer, not for the time that you've spent, but for what you can demonstrate. But everything becomes demonstration at that point. If you have no past history, you have to lean very heavily into what you can demonstrate for an employer. And you need to walk into that conversation before you let them bring you to the conversation of your past experience. You should get to the demonstration, the demonstrable part of your code as quickly as possible, so that the idea of talk to me about your past experience is the afterthought and not the gate to get you to that demonstration.
Definitely. Yes, I agree. Um, how did you deal with rejections? Or, um, how did you deal with rejections? And also, how did you keep yourself motivated in this job search?
So, I needed the money at the time. Who doesn't when you've been in boot camp for 4 months and you're just, running on savings? But I put out all of those resumes, and you just get hundreds of rejection templates from LinkedIn. Thank you for applying but not interested. Thank you but applying for not interested. From Indeed, I tried Angel List, I tried some other random ones I can't remember the names of right now. But getting all those back, I just had to frame my mind and tell myself at the time that those are just templates. Those are, they're noise is ultimately what they are. They are noise to be ignored because they don't mean anything. What I'm looking for is not how many rejection emails I get back. What I'm looking for is how many people get back and want to set up an interview, or they want to schedule a time with me. So I defined my success metrics not by how many emails I put out, because I would get almost the same amount of rejections back. But I defined my metrics as getting my foot in the door and then how I could work with them. And each time it was an iteration. And isn't this software engineering? Everything is an iterable process, meaning you repeat it and you improve on each step. So the very first interview I have, I probably did terribly. I remember talking to different employers, And remember, at first, I'm not telling them about the Philippines. Then I find I'm wasting my time. Then I start telling them, like, hey, I'm from the Philippines. I start talking to people about little pieces of my code base, and I realize I need to paint them a large, complex picture. It's not enough to just maybe talk a little bit about React or some of the knowledge questions. I need to show them the understanding of complexity in my code base as much as I can possibly do so. And each iteration I got better, right? It was frustrating to get rejections. It was frustrating when somebody said, sorry, we're not really interested. And I felt disheartened at times. I took it and I said, you know what, I'm gonna go eat some cheesecake. I'm gonna, go and do something nice for myself, because you have to find ways to keep yourself motivated in this process. Most people are gonna say no until you get to that one person who says yes. And at the end of the day, I I know that's going to happen. And if you don't know that's going to happen, you're going to be really disheartened. But because you know in advance, like, hey, I'm going to get told no, and a lot of people are going to not care about my skills. If you let When I let that take it personally to me, I devalued my own skills. And then I ended up with a $30,000 job at Somi Somi Ice Cream. But when I focused on the employers that did care about what I showed them, and they did care about what I was presenting to them, when I walked into it with an air of confidence, oh yeah, offer me 80, offer me more than 80, I'm interested. That right there, the fact that I believed in my skills was what made the employer believe in the skills. So if you lose sight of the fact that you're the only one that can walk in with that motivation and convince an employer you're worth that, then you're never going to get a good job, because you have to be the one who believes that you're worth that value to the employer. And if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. So you have to keep your motivation up for that reason, at the very minimum, that you believe that those skills are worth the value that you're asking for.
I definitely agree, like pointing that out what you were saying, I always recommend to include, everything you can on your resume. Even if you watched a YouTube video who helped you understand something different about any other type of language, that would still help you to, showcase your skills. Um,
Sure.
and then, so I would like to ask you one more thing. So, you know, this field is of, constant learning, you know, um, so how did it go with your time schedule, or how did you time block your schedule while you were job search, because we need to include coding, applying to jobs, studying. If you would like to make some money on the other side, maybe a half-time job, I don't know. Um, so
So my
yeah,
friends
go ahead.
thought it was really cool that I'd become a software engineer. And in fact, one of them thought it was cool enough. He's like, hey, can you make me a website? And and I was like, sure, what do you want to pay me? And he's like, I'll pay you 200 bucks. And that's not a whole lot of money. But you know what? It was enough of a motivation for me to say, okay, I'll make you a little rinky dink. I'll make you a website. And that website is still on the web today. It's called cebubahaltours.com. It's for a friend in the Philippines. And it's got some nice cards on it, and it's got some navigation. It integrates one third-party API that sends him an email if somebody contacts him. Um, and that was kind of my pet project. I needed to keep myself coding, so I try and spend like 3 hours a day working on that project for the weeks that I was not employed. I also spent, I'd say, an hour or two, maybe 3 hours at most, sending out 50 applications every day. I usually try to do it in the morning. Um, here's this benefit I noticed, is that because I was in the Philippines, when I was applying during the day, nobody else was applying. Because in America, it's the middle of the night. So my application was pretty much the first thing that came in the morning at the top of the list. And I took that as a, hey, the early bird gets the worm kind of thing. If I want the employer's eye, then I'm going to apply at a time where hopefully he sees my application at the top of his list, because there are hundreds of people that apply to those jobs sometimes. And I just want to catch him at a good time that he's going to read it. So a few hours working on coding, a few hours working on The application process, I was checking in constantly with Sabio. They were seeing how I was doing. They were motivating us as a group. Um, and I spent a considerable amount of time following up with interviews. Like any person that I could that had given me any time of day, I was bending over backwards to find times with them to interview. Because obviously for me, it's like 2 in the morning and I got to interview. And I was working with them to give them feedback as soon as possible. I was responsive, and that helps you a lot when you are immediately responsive, because recruiters and employers, they're reaching out to you now and they want you now. And if they can't get you now, a lot of times they're going to move on to the next candidate on the list and see how that one goes. So there's a little bit of a chance, and you just have to take it when it comes.
Definitely. And I have enjoyed a lot of this conversation. So I just realized that we have only 8 minutes left. However, I would like to ask you two more questions. The first one will be, um, like people that we have right now are people that are currently in our cohorts, they are studying. Um, and we also have some other folks who are working on a part-time cohort. um, that means that maybe their program is longer, but the working hours are completely different because they're working, I don't know if 6 p.m. to 9 or 10 p.m. So it's a little bit after hours. So now that you passed through the experience of working midnight to noon, because of the time schedule, that you had at that time in the Philippines, what would be one piece of advice for them specifically that are running the part-time cohort?
Don't cut your hours short. It's really it's really tempting to not work the hours that you're not being watched, as long as your walk time matches the minimums that you're expected. Don't do that. You do not understand how much time, how much you need that time with hands to keys. And I'll relate it like this. I worked as a trucker one time, and the trucker that taught me, he was a Kentucky man and he had a real thick accent. And he said, "You know how you make the money from this truck?" He said, "You keep the left door shut." And what's the answer there is you stay applied to the job. If you get out and you take a lot of breaks, you don't make it and you don't make money per load. If you take a lot of breaks when you're on asynchronous work, you're selling yourself short, because in the real world where I am as a programmer, I have to apply myself no matter if I have distractions, no matter if I have guests that come over. I have to make the time that I am expected to work, and then some in some cases, because ultimately software engineering is a job where the job is either done and it works or it doesn't. There's no credit for the amount of time that you've spent. There is credit for if the job is done or not. And you have to get to a point where you have spent enough time that the job is done. And if that takes 5 hours or it takes 7 hours, you have to get the job done. And ultimately, you will become more efficient and you will be able to block yourself in smaller periods of time for more complex tasks. But you don't sell yourself short on your time.
Definitely. Thank you very much for that advice. I completely agree. And then the other question is, what is one advice that you would like to give, to the Sabio cohorts right now, people that are here, um, as they are, going through the program?
So I'll leave you with this imparted advice. Walking through Sabio is not a piece of cake on in anybody's imagination, as I'm sure that many of you are already very well aware. You may feel that it is strict. It is. You may feel that the requirements are stringent, and they are. But you're out here to make money. You are out here to make $95,000 a year. You're out here to make $75 an hour on the side. You're talking about like $20,000 a month. So yeah, you better just get it in line and do everything that's expected of you, and then do more of it, because that's how you make the money. So if you don't like the requirements that are put on you, if you feel that the boot camp is too hard on you, then go make $40,000, $50,000 in another career. But people make hundreds of thousands of dollars in this field. And Gregorio is setting you up for success to make that money. So take it, be energetic, you know, walk into it and say, I'm alive, alert, awake, enthusiastic, and take it further than what he's asking you for, because you are the one that benefits from it.
Definitely. All right, so I would love to take advantage of these 4 minutes left. If anyone wants to ask any question to call in directly, maybe we have time for one or two questions. So please raise your hand and see if we can get at least two questions there. Guadalupe, thank you very much for that first hand, and go ahead with your
Yeah.
question.
Hi, and thank you, Colin, for taking your time to come talk to us. It's really enlightening to hear sort of the different strategies you did, especially with the Philippines. And I guess that right now we're in the time where we're kind of applying everywhere, right? We want to throwing our fishing lines out there, and I only thought about it like across the US. And I guess being outside of the US and applying in, what are some of the other strategies that you might have? So I guess one point of conflict that I keep thinking about is I live here in Los Angeles, which is a high cost of living, right? But if I apply to somewhere with a lower cost of living, um, something that I might ask may seem like a high salary, right? So I guess I wonder what would be your recommendations to applying different places with different sort of salary bases?
So a company, you got two schools of thought here. You've got what your trade is actually worth, and then how companies are going to try and take advantage of where you live to pay you less. I'm going to tell you right now that where you live does not dictate how much money that you should make. You know, if you want to go and live in a low cost of living place like Pensacola, I live in Pensacola now. Low cost of living, you can make a lot of money with the career because your skills are valuable no matter where you are. Living in Los Angeles should be a personal choice. If you want to live in Los Angeles because you like Los Angeles, then live in Los Angeles. Um, but don't let any company tell you that your skills are worth more or less depending on where you live. So if you want to move for a job and you have to move for a job because it's not remote, you know, that's a different story. And you're now in a position where you have to choose, you know, where companies are offering you more money. Again, not because of where you live, but because of what the skill is worth. This is a world where we're living in a world where software is workable from almost anywhere now. And the ability to define pay rates for software engineering by geography is drifting away. Let go of that mentality and move where you want to move if that's what, you know, the best offer from the company, but live where you want to live and get paid what your skill is worth and keep them separate.
That's a good point. I didn't think about companies taking advantage of if you lived in in sort of a lower pay area. And I guess if I can add on to that, have you seen any companies kind of try to take advantage on trying to lowball, like give you a lowball offer?
Sure, of course. Larger companies that are stationed, especially, and ultimately, I'm going to cut that question short with the answer that companies that want to pay according to a geography ultimately are going to require you to live in that geography. There are just opportunities that won't be available to you from lower income areas because the company will want you to live in the area that they're paying you for that salary.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I'm going to take 1 or 2 minutes more if it is okay with you. I'm so sorry, but I want to hear to Byron's questions. So Byron, go ahead with your question.
We can't hear you, boss.
Yeah, I think you're muted.
Yeah. I'd like to say that never happens, but so you mentioned
Every Zoom
about,
call.
firstly, sorry for taking up more of your time, but you mentioned about leveraging experience that you kind of had in the industry. I have some basis, I don't know if this is more a personal question than anything, but I've had more experience more on the avionics side of things whilst I was in the Marine Corps. Was there a way, do you think that you leveraged your military experience or what you did in the Marine Corps prior to in any way? Because I know some of us, specifically me, I had like electronics experience with planes prior to. However, that wouldn't really constitute programming per se. It could. I was just wondering how deep did you
You and I were
go?
in the same boat. I was an avionics guy for RTCAS technician, as an RTCAS
Okay.
technician in the Marine Corps. I worked on FA-18 fighter aircraft. I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I understand the concepts of electronics that pass over in very basic concepts, and NAND, or gates, electronics, and how
Yeah.
we use these concepts in programming. But I'm going to tell you right now that when you cut to the chase with an employer, the military factor is a benefit for personality. And I
Okay.
don't mean that to be mean, but when you come from any other career path other than programming, or anything that has direct programming experience, or anything that works with programming related concepts, you are telling those things to hopefully connect with an employer. And military, that works a lot. That works oftentimes because there's a lot of military guys out there, and they relate to military guys, and so they might prioritize looking at military resumes and giving people a shot because they like them. So military is not bad to put on there, just to put up a little flag that says, hey, I'm a hard worker, I'm military, I'm somebody that gets the job done. But it's not going to get you very far on the leverage that you're looking for unless you can take concepts from it and directly relate them to programming, like project management. This is, can you ever say you ever worked with any IT guys or developers? Or do you understand what it's like to have daily meetings beforehand and manage a team that's working on different facets? You have to find what connects directly to programming concepts and apply them for leverage.
No, I appreciate that, keeping it real. I'd rather hear that here than in the interview itself, and not lean too heavily on stuff like that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Well, so thank you very much, Colin, for your time, for coming back, telling us your story. Thank you, for all these advices that you just have given to us, and for our people, and to keep, like, to help us keep them motivated, because they are just starting to job searching, and this is the future that they may have. So thank you again, and I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
It's been a pleasure. Likewise. Thank you for all of your time.
Mhm. Well, guys, that was said. Thank you for your time, and bye-bye.
Peace.